I used to think that space was a luxury, but in Tokyo, it's a mathematical problem. I lived in a 10 square meter micro apartment. Everything was about stacking, sliding, and fitting. My life was compressed into a series of vertical lines, but no matter how hard you push a wardrobe against a crooked wall, there's always a gap. A Sukima. It's a tiny sliver of nothingness, maybe 2 centimeters wide, where the dust settles and the light refuses to go. There's an old piece of folklore about these gaps, the Sukima-onna, or the gap woman. They say she doesn't just live in the shadows, she is the shadow. My grandmother told me once that if you acknowledge the gap acknowledges you. I laughed it off back then. I kept my room clean, but I always avoided looking into that dark line behind my bed. I told myself it was just claustrophobia, but then I started hearing it. A faint tink sound, like a heavy ceramic mug being placed on wood, but the sound came from deep within the shadows behind my desk, delayed by a fraction of a second, as if something back there was mimicking my movements with a slight lag. I never looked. I didn't want to see what was waiting in the dark. Last Tuesday, things shifted from a feeling to a physical violation. I was vacuuming near the baseboard when I saw it. A 10 yen coin. It was wedged in a 5 millimeter gap between the floor and the wall. But it wasn't just lying there, it was standing perfectly on its edge. There is no physical way a coin could balance like that in a space that narrow, especially with the vibrations of the city outside. I reached out to touch it, and my fingers brushed the wall. The air felt heavy, like the gaps were suddenly pressurized, pulling the oxygen right out of the room. The shadows looked different too, not like a lack of light, but like solid black velvet thick enough to touch. That's when I heard the scratching. It was the dry, rhythmic sound of a fingernail dragging against the back of the hollow wardrobe. It wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from a space only a few millimeters wide, a space where no human hand could possibly fit. I picked up the coin. It wasn't cold like metal should be. It was warm. Exactly 36 degrees. Body temperature. The logic in my brain started to fray. I needed to know. I grabbed my tactical flashlight, the high-lumen one I use for hiking, and I pointed it directly into the widest gap in the room. The light cut through the dust, and for a second I thought I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted. There was a face, but it didn't make sense. It was stretched, distorted vertically to fit the 2 centimeter width of the gap. It looked like a reflection in a funhouse mirror, but it was three-dimensional. A single lidless eye was positioned exactly in the center of the dark line. It didn't blink. It didn't even seem to have a socket. It was just an eye, tracking me with a terrifying high-speed jitter. When I moved the flashlight, the eye zipped to stay aligned with the beam, moving with a mechanical precision that defied biology. I panicked. I grabbed a heavy hardcover book and tried to shove it into the gap to block the view. I expected to hit the wood of the wardrobe or the concrete of the wall. Instead, the book hit something soft. It felt like wet, dense muscle, the kind of resistance you feel when you push against a person's chest. And then it pushed back. The book was slowly, steadily forced out of the gap by an invisible flat weight. It wasn't a ghost, it was a physical entity that had no thickness. I could hear the sound of wet leather sliding against sandpaper, the sound of her shifting her weight within the wall cavity. She wasn't behind the wall. She was inside the space between the wallpaper and the concrete. She was inhabiting the architecture itself. I started taping. I didn't care how crazy it looked. I bought industrial-strength duct tape and began sealing every gap, every crack, every sliver of shadow in that apartment. As I was taping the side of the wardrobe, a hand emerged. It didn't have any volume. It was a pale, two-dimensional silhouette that slid under the tape as if the adhesive wasn't even there. It was a hand, but it was flat as a sheet of paper, translucent and impossibly long. The smell hit me then. The scent of ozone and ancient, airless dust, like a tomb that hadn't been opened in 1,000 years. But the more I taped, the more gaps I saw. A hairline crack in the ceiling, the fold in my own bedsheets, the microscopic space between my own fingers. I realized then that the Sukima-onna wasn't a visitor. She was the truth. Our reality is just a series of thin layers, and she is the glue holding them together. I felt a cold, flat weight press against my entire back. I wasn't being touched by a person. I was being touched by the space behind me. I felt a flat, pale finger gently trace my eyelid from the inside of the gap of my own closed eye. There was no escape because there is no such thing as a solid object. Everything has a gap if you look closely enough. I left. I ran out into the street, into the wide open plaza of Shibuya. I thought the sunlight and the crowds would save me. But then I looked down. I saw the gaps between the paving stones. I saw the space between the people standing in line, even in a crowd of 1,000. Everyone is separated by a Sukima. We are all living in individual cells, and she is the one walking the corridors between us. I want you to do something for me. Look at the device you're using right now. Look at the microscopic gap between the glass screen and the metal frame. It's less than 1 millimeter wide, but that's all she needs. She's there, watching you read this, waiting for you to notice the shadow in the corner of your eye. You don't need to leave the door open to let her in. You just need to leave 1 millimeter of doubt, because once you see the gap, you can never unsee it. And she's been waiting for you to look back for a very, very long time. Sleep well tonight. Just try not to think about the space under your pillow.